Return of the Jedi wasn't just the conclusion to the original Star Wars trilogy. It was a battleground of creative chaos, studio pressure, and last-minute decisions that nearly derailed the entire franchise. Behind that triumphant Ewok celebration and Darth Vader's redemption lay a production plagued by budget nightmares, on-set tensions, and life-threatening stunts. Harrison Ford desperately fighting to kill off his character. Costume disasters leaving actors hospitalized. George Lucas scrapping the original ending just weeks before deadline. And a director who was barely speaking to his cast by the final day of shooting. Today, we're breaking down 20 weird facts about Return of the Jedi that even die-hard Star Wars fans don't know. And stick around for our bonus fact, the shocking studio demand that almost replaced the Ewoks with something much more terrifying. Hit that play button and prepare to see the galaxy far, far away in a whole new light. 1. The film almost had a completely different title. Return of the Jedi wasn't always called that. For most of its production, the film operated under the title Revenge of the Jedi. It wasn't a working title, it was the actual title. Teaser posters were printed, merchandise was designed, and trailers were created using Revenge. But just weeks before release, George Lucas had a philosophical revelation. Jedi are peacekeepers who wouldn't seek revenge. The last-minute change cost 20th Century Fox hundreds of thousands of dollars in marketing materials. Some of those original Revenge of the Jedi posters still exist, now selling for thousands of dollars to collectors. What's wilder? Lucas later recycled the discarded title for his prequel finale, initially planning to call it Return of the Sith, before flipping it to Revenge of the Sith. Full circle. 2. Harrison Ford fought to kill Han Solo. Harrison Ford didn't just want out of Star Wars, he lobbied aggressively for Han Solo to die heroically in Return of the Jedi. I thought it would give the story more weight and resonance, Ford revealed in later interviews. His proposed death scene? Han sacrificing himself during the raid on the shield generator to ensure the mission's success. Lucas refused, sparking tension that lingered throughout filming. George basically told me, "There's no money in dead hand toys," Ford claimed. The decision profoundly affected Ford's performance. Watch closely, and you'll notice Han's limited emotional range compared to previous films. Ford later called his participation contractual obligation acting. The actor wouldn't get his wish for a heroic Star Wars death until The Force Awakens, 32 years later. By then, the emotional impact had multiplied tenfold. 3. The Ewoks replaced a much darker concept. The Ewoks weren't created to sell toys, they were actually a desperate last-minute replacement. Lucas originally wrote Endor as a planet of Wookiees, leading a primitive rebellion against the Empire. But after introducing Chewbacca as technologically advanced in previous films, the concept didn't make sense. With production deadlines looming, Lucas created the Ewoks, essentially miniaturized Wookiee that could believably exist in a Stone Age culture. What most fans don't realize, the Ewok battle sequence was significantly more violent in early cuts. The original version showed dozens of Ewoks being slaughtered, revealed editor Sean Barton. There was a real darkness to it, with Imperial troops executing the creatures at point-blank range. Disney's archives still hold this footage, deemed too traumatizing for the film's younger audience. What remains still hints at the darkness. Several Ewok deaths made the final cut, including one particularly poignant moment where an Ewok tries to wake his fallen comrade. 4. Carrie Fisher's iconic costume. Nearly killed her. Carrie Fisher's gold bikini became the film's most iconic costume and almost ended her life. The metal outfit weighed nearly 12 pounds and consisted of sharp-edged brass pieces that regularly cut into Fisher's skin during the lengthy Jabba's palace sequence. That metal bikini I wore was so rigid that when I would sit, the entire outfit would dig into my flesh and leave these giant grooves in my stomach, Fisher revealed. More dangerously, in the strangling scene with Jabba, the chain actually closed Fisher's windpipe during a take. The chain wasn't breakaway, it was real metal on a real collar, said assistant director Thomas Smith. When the Jabba puppet moved unexpectedly, the chain tightened and Carrie couldn't breathe. We had to stop filming and rush in. After that incident, Fisher insisted on performing her own stunt for killing Jabba, saying, That scene became personal revenge for what the costume had put me through. 5. Jabba the Hutt was a mechanical nightmare that tortured its operators. Jabba the Hutt wasn't just a puppet, he was a 2,000-pound, $250,000 mechanical beast requiring 7 puppeteers working in toxic. Built with foam latex over an aluminum skeleton, the Jabba mechanism housed 3 operators inside its body cavity where temperatures reached over 110 degrees within minutes of operation. We were essentially entombed in there, recalled Chief Jabba operator Toby Philpott. After 30 minutes, the latex would begin breaking down, releasing noxious fumes we were breathing in a confined space. The puppeteers worked in shifts, often vomiting between takes from the heat and chemicals. One puppeteer passed out inside the mechanism, requiring emergency extraction. Jabba's tail operator, David Barclay, suffered chemical burns on his hands that left permanent scars. Despite these horrors, the team delivered one of cinema's most convincing practical creatures, a technological marvel that CGI still struggles to match 40 years later. 6. The original Emperor wasn't Ian McDiarmid. The Emperor we know from Return of the Jedi wasn't the original Emperor in the Star Wars saga. In The Empire Strikes Back, Emperor Palpatine was portrayed by a woman, actress Marjorie Eaton, wearing heavy prosthetics with chimpanzee eyes superimposed over her own through rotoscoping. For Jedi, Lucas wanted a more intimidating presence and cast 38-year-old Ian McDiarmid. What audiences don't know, McDiarmid's makeup process was so brutal that it became a health concern. The yellow contact lenses were essentially primitive by today's standards, McDiarmid revealed. They reduced my vision to almost nothing and caused corneal abrasions that required medical treatment between filming days. The prosthetic application took over 4 hours daily, with chemicals that burned his skin. Most shocking? McDiarmid was decades younger than the character appeared. Skilled makeup artists aged him up by nearly 50 years. Lucas was so impressed by McDiarmid's dedication that he later cast him as the younger Palpatine in the prequels, allowing the actor to play the character's full arc. 7. The original ending was completely different. Return of the Jedi's triumphant Ewok celebration wasn't the original finale. Lucas's first cut ended with Luke walking off alone into the sunset, like a Western hero, while the rebels celebrated separately. A direct parallel to the ending of A New Hope. Test audiences hated it. People were confused and depressed, said producer Howard Kazanjian. They wanted emotional closure after investing in these characters for 3 films. With just 5 weeks before theatrical release, Lucas ordered an emergency reshoot of the ending, gathering the principal cast for one final day of filming. The new ending, showing all our heroes celebrating together, was shot in a cramped studio set with a reduced Ewok village and fewer extras. The most interesting detail? The music during this scene was different in Lucas's original cut. Instead of the upbeat Yubnub Ewok Celebration song, later replaced by Victory Celebration in the special edition, composer John Williams had written a somber, reflective piece that emphasized sacrifice rather than victory, better matching Lucas's initial, darker. 8. David Lynch was offered the chance to direct before. Richard Marquand landed the directing job. George Lucas approached artistic visionary David Lynch to helm Return of the Jedi. Fresh off the critically acclaimed The Elephant Man, Lynch was considered a rising directorial star. Lucas invited him to Skywalker Ranch to discuss the project. I had next door to zero interest in science fiction, Lynch later admitted. Lucas took me to lunch and described these Ewoks. As he talked, I felt my body starting to sweat. These weren't my people. This wasn't my world. During their meeting, Lynch experienced what he called a splitting headache as Lucas outlined the existing Star Wars universe constraints. Lynch declined the offer the next day and instead directed Dune, ironically. A different space opera that flopped critically and commercially. Lucas moved on to Marquand, who was more willing to execute Lucas's specific vision. Film historians still debate what a Lynch-directed Jedi might have looked like, with Lynch himself stating, "It would have been a disaster for everyone involved. Star Wars needed someone who loved the material. I would have turned it into something unrecognizable." 9. The speeder bike chase used revolutionary techniques that nearly failed. The exhilarating speeder bike chase through Endor's forests wasn't CGI. It was created using a technique so dangerous the camera operators refused to do it initially. Industrial light and magic cameraman Garrett Brown modified his Steadicam to film while walking through redwood forests at normal speed. When this footage was sped up dramatically, it created the illusion of flying at 120 meters. We were essentially walking through uneven forest terrain with a 70-pound camera rig, focusing on extremely precise framing, Brown explained. One trip or stumble would ruin the shot and potentially destroy expensive equipment. Several cameramen suffered serious injuries during filming, including broken ribs and a shattered kneecap. Mid-roll engagement. Hook. Go ahead and like and subscribe because we're just getting to the really wild stuff, like the near-fatal accident on set that Lucas personally covered up, and the secret meaning behind the Ewoks that Star Wars fans are still arguing about today. Plus, coming up is the return of the Jedi scene that was so controversial it caused parents to walk their kids out of theaters. You won't want to miss these. 10. The film's marketing campaign was built on an elaborate lie. Blue Harvest, horror beyond imagination. This wasn't just a code name, but an elaborate deception involving fake crew jackets, false production documents, and an entirely fabricated horror movie. When word leaked that the third Star Wars film would shoot in California's redwood forests, local businesses immediately jacked up prices for everything from accommodation to equipment rentals. Lucas's solution was unprecedented, creating a complete phantom production. Crew members signed legal documents agreeing to tell anyone who asked that they were filming a low-budget horror movie called Blue Harvest. The production went so far as to create promotional items including hats, t-shirts, and bumper stickers for this non-existent film. The deception worked too well. Horror film distributors began contacting Fox about acquiring distribution rights to Blue Harvest. The most bizarre consequence? A small but dedicated horror fan community formed around rumors of this lost film, with online forums still speculating about whether footage exists. Some crew members have reported that Blue Harvest memorabilia now fetches higher prices among collectors than the actual Jedi production items. 11. The actor inside Darth Vader never knew the famous plot twist. In, perhaps, the cruelest production secret, David Prowse, the 6'6" bodybuilder who physically portrayed Darth Vader, was never told about the film's iconic plot twist. To preserve the secret that Vader was Luke's father, revealed in Empire Strikes Back, Prowse was given fake dialogue to perform on set. David read lines on set that had nothing to do with the actual plot, revealed Mark Hamill. His script had Vader denying being Luke's father and claiming Obi-Wan had killed Luke's real father. The deception continued in Return of the Jedi, where Prowse wasn't informed that another actor, Sebastian Shaw, would portray unmasked Vader. Prowse only discovered the truth at the film's premiere, watching his character's pivotal death scene performed by another actor. This treatment contributed to a growing rift between Prowse and Lucasfilm that culminated in his eventual banning from official Star Wars conventions. That character physical presence for 3 films, Prowse stated in a 2016 interview. To be excluded from the character's most human moment felt like a betrayal I never fully recovered from. 12. Yoda almost didn't appear in the film. Yoda's death scene, one of the most emotional moments in Return of the Jedi, was added to the script just 3 months before filming. The original screenplay didn't include Yoda at all, with Obi-Wan's ghost solely explaining Vader's relationship to Luke. We felt something was missing in early readings, Lawrence Kasdan, the film's co-writer, explained. Luke needed closure with his master, and audiences needed to see Yoda one last time. The late edition created immense technical challenges. Frank Oz, Yoda's puppeteer, was directing the Dark Crystal and initially unavailable. The production scrambled, rebuilding the Yoda puppet. The original had deteriorated in storage, and negotiating a 2-day filming window in Oz's schedule. The scene was shot in just 9 hours with minimal. Oz operated Yoda while battling a high fever, performing the entire sequence from a cramped pit beneath the set floor. The emotional weight of the scene, particularly Yoda's line, "When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be," was largely improvised by Oz, who later said, "I knew this was goodbye to a character I loved." The emotion in my performance came from a real place of farewell. 13. The Sarlacc Pit sequence caused multiple life-threatening injuries. The Sarlacc Pit battle sequence left more than Boba Fett supposedly dead. It nearly killed several stunt performers and crew members. Filmed in Arizona's Buttercup Valley during a record heat wave, temperatures on the metal sail barge set reached 135 degrees, causing widespread heat exhaustion. "We had IV stations set up just off camera," recalled stunt coordinator Glenn Randall. Performers in alien costumes were literally collapsing between takes. The mechanical Sarlacc tentacles, operated by hydraulics beneath the sand, malfunctioned repeatedly, violently striking stunt performers. One crew member suffered a fractured skull, while another was hospitalized with internal injuries. The most dangerous moment came when a windstorm hit during filming of the explosion sequence. Wind speeds exceeded 60 mph, turning sand into a blinding, skin-stripping projectile. The partial collapse of the sail barge set injured 3 crew members. Harrison Ford, against production orders, helped evacuate injured personnel as flying debris continued to threaten the crew. Despite capturing this harrowing footage at great human cost, much of it was deemed unusable due to the visible chaos of the unplanned storm, requiring expensive reshoots on a California soundstage. 14. The Ewok language is actually a real Earth language. The Ewok language isn't fictional gibberish. It's a simplified version of a real language spoken by the Kalmyk people in Russia. Sound designer Ben Burt, responsible for creating Star Wars alien languages, recorded elderly Kalmyk speakers in the early 1980s, manipulating the speed and pitch of their voices to create the Ewok dialect. "I was searching for something that sounded primitive but had authentic linguistic roots," Burt explained. The Kalmyk language had this wonderful earthy quality. What most viewers don't know, the Ewok dialogue actually contains consistent, translatable phrases. When the elderly Ewok Logray speaks to Chief Chirpa about the newcomers, he's saying, in simplified Kalmyk, "These strangers bring death to our forest." The most fascinating detail? When Lucasfilm screened Return of the Jedi for a group of Kalmyk immigrants in California, they reportedly recognized enough words to follow simple elements of the Ewok conversations. One elderly viewer was brought to tears, saying, "I never expected to hear my childhood language in a Hollywood movie." The Kalmyk community has since embraced this connection, with some linguistic scholars crediting Star Wars with helping preserve interest in their endangered language. 15. Harrison Ford suffered a serious injury that was hidden from insurance companies. During filming of the bunker raid sequence on Endor, Harrison Ford suffered a serious back injury when a stormtrooper accidentally struck him with the butt of a prop blaster. The impact herniated a disc in Ford's spine, leaving him barely able to walk, let alone perform his scheduled action sequences. Rather than report the injury, which would have shut down production for weeks while insurance claims were processed, Ford, Lucas, and the medical team concocted a risky plan. "We had a doctor on set injecting Harrison's spine with cortisone between takes," Assistant Director David Tomlin. "He was in excruciating pain, but refused to stop filming." Watch Hand's scenes in the second half of the film closely. Ford performs nearly every scene either sitting down or standing completely still. The injury is most noticeable during the shield generator destruction sequence, where Ford barely moves while everyone around him runs. The injury plagued Ford for years, eventually requiring surgery. When asked why he didn't halt production, Ford simply stated, "Movies aren't insured for discomfort. I wasn't going to be the reason this massive production fell behind schedule." 16. The Death Star explosion reused footage. From the original film, the spectacular explosion of the second Death Star, seemingly more elaborate and dramatic than the first film's explosion, wasn't actually new footage. Facing budget constraints in the final months of post-production, Lucas made a controversial decision to reuse the explosion from A New Hope, merely adding new foreground elements and color timing. "We were $3 million over budget and running out of time," effects supervisor Ken Ralston admitted. Using the original explosion with enhancements was a practical solution nobody expected viewers to notice. The recycled explosion was disguised by filming new angles of Rebel ships reacting to the blast and adding unique debris elements in the foreground. Lucas defended the decision as poetic symmetry, but privately acknowledged it was primarily financial. What's particularly interesting is that for the 1997 special edition re-release, despite having the budget to create a new explosion, Lucas chose to keep the repurposed blast from the original film, merely adding digital enhancements. This makes the Death Star explosion one of the few visual elements to appear in multiple Star Wars films. A recycled shot that appears at climactic moments across different movies in the saga. 17. The original director quit halfway through production. What few fans realize, Return of the Jedi was partially directed by an uncredited filmmaker. Richard Marquand, the official director, clashed severely with Lucas over creative control. According to multiple crew accounts, Marquand struggled with the technical aspects of effects-heavy sequences, leading Lucas to take over directing duties for approximately 30% of the film. It was an open secret on set, camera operator Alec Mills wrote in his memoir. For many of the complex battle sequences, Richard would essentially step aside while George called the shots. The tension escalated when Lucas brought in uncredited co-directors for second unit work, including Joe Johnston, who later directed The Rocketeer and Captain America. By the final month of production, Marquand and Lucas were reportedly not speaking directly to each other, communicating through intermediaries on. Marquand's original cut of the film was substantially reworked in editing, with Lucas overseeing significant restructuring. Despite being the official director, Marquand was excluded from much of post-production and was not consulted on the final edit. He never directed another major Hollywood film and passed away 4 years later at age 49, having never publicly discussed the troubled production. 18. Lucas fought the studio over the film's darker elements. Return of the Jedi's surprisingly dark elements, including the Emperor's torture of Luke and Vader's death scene, triggered intense battles between Lucas and 20th Century Fox executives. Studio notes from early screenings reveal executives demanded cutting Luke's force choking of Jabba's guards, removing Vader's unmasking scene, deemed too disturbing for children, and eliminating the Emperor's force lightning attack. The studio wanted essentially a victory lap film with minimal conflict, editor Paul Hirsch revealed. They argued that kids wouldn't understand the Emperor's temptation of Luke to the dark side. Lucas, exhausted from similar battles on previous films, threatened to withdraw the film from release and self-distribute if the studio demanded these changes. The compromise was strategic. Lucas kept the darker elements but softened their impact through editing and music. The Emperor's torture of Luke was shortened by 40 seconds, and Williams's score was adjusted to make Vader's death more redemptive than tragic. Even with these modifications, test screenings showed young children hiding their eyes during the Emperor's scenes. Some theaters reported families leaving during Luke's torture sequence, prompting Fox to consider strengthening the PG rating with additional warnings, an early precursor to the later PG-13 rating that didn't yet exist. 19. Ian McDiarmid improvised the Emperor's most chilling line. "Now, young Skywalker, you will die." This iconic line, delivered with bone-chilling menace before the Emperor unleashes Force lightning, wasn't in the script. The original dialogue was a longer, more explanatory monologue about the dark side's superiority. During filming, McDiarmid felt it didn't capture the Emperor's sadistic nature. After several takes of the written dialogue, I asked George if I could try something different, McDiarmid revealed. I felt Palpatine wouldn't explain himself at the moment of triumph. He'd savor it with terrifying simplicity. Lucas allowed one improvised take, which McDiarmid delivered with such disturbing intensity that crew members later described the set falling completely silent afterward. The improvised line was immediately recognized as superior and used in the final cut. What's particularly noteworthy is McDiarmid's subtle vocal technique. He recorded the line twice, once in his normal register and once in a deeper, guttural tone. Sound designers layered these recordings to create the Emperor's supernaturally menacing voice. This layering technique became standard for Sith characters in later films, including Darth Maul and Kylo Ren. 20. Executives tried to force a Han-Leia wedding ending. In the final weeks of editing, 20th Century Fox executives made an extraordinary demand: add a wedding scene between Han and Leia to end the film. Studio marketing research suggested audiences wanted definitive closure for the romantic subplot, with executives sending Lucas detailed concepts for an Ewok village wedding ceremony. It was completely contrary to the tone we'd established, editor Sean Barton recalled. Lucas was apoplectic at the suggestion. The studio's pressure was financially motivated. They believed a wedding finale would boost repeat viewings among female audiences, a demographic their research showed is likely to see the film multiple times. Lucas refused outright, arguing it would undermine the film's broader themes of sacrifice and spiritual redemption. The compromise was the expanded celebration scene, with a meaningful glance between Han and Leia, implying their future together without explicitly showing. Concept art for the proposed wedding scene still exists in the Lucasfilm archives, showing Leia in an elaborate white dress with Ewok flower bearers. Harrison Ford, upon learning of the proposed scene years later, reportedly said, "That would have been the moment I walked off set for good." Bonus fact: the most shocking secret about Return of the Jedi remains locked in Lucasfilm's vault, an alternate ending that was fully filmed but never shown publicly. In this version, after Vader throws the Emperor down the shaft and Luke removes his father's mask, Luke puts on Vader's helmet himself, turns to the camera, and says, "Now I am Vader," suggesting he would take his father's place. This shocking twist, Luke succumbing to the dark side, was filmed as a safeguard against plot leaks, but several crew members have confirmed it exists. It was shot with the understanding it would never be used, revealed camera operator Tim McDonald. Lucas was paranoid about the film's secrets getting out, so he created this false ending as misinformation. Only a handful of people saw this footage, filmed with minimal crew and without full special effects. The negatives were reportedly sealed in the Lucasfilm archives with strict access restrictions. Mark Hamill has obliquely referenced this scene in interviews. Once, "There was a version we shot that would have changed everything about how people remember Star Wars, but thankfully, that's not the story George wanted to." This alternative dark ending, if it were ever released, would retroactively transform the entire meaning of the original trilogy. Return of the Jedi wasn't just the conclusion of the original Star Wars trilogy. It was a battlefield of creative conflicts, physical suffering, and behind-the-scenes chaos that somehow produced cinematic magic. From the title change that cost thousands to the secret footage locked away forever, this film represents the challenging reality behind fantasy filmmaking. What makes these revelations so powerful isn't just their shock value, but how they transform our understanding of the film itself. Knowing the physical agony behind Carrie Fisher's iconic costume, or the bitter creative disputes that shaped the ending, adds layers of appreciation for what emerged from that turmoil, a cultural touchstone that continues to resonate decades later. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Return of the Jedi, hit like and subscribe for more film secrets. And remember, in movies as in The Force, there is always a balance between what we see on screen and the untold stories behind it. Until next time, may the production facts be with you.